Hello and welcome back to the CardRPG Scriptable Object tutorial for Unity. This is video 14. This is about the Trinket Manager and container. So we're going to get into that now. First thing we actually have to do is, based on the effect container and the stuff that we created last video, we need to go in and create an enemy status container as well, because the enemies can also be affected by cards. Right click on the enemy UI item, so inside the enemy prefab. Enemy UI, we're going to right click and click create empty. We're going to hit F2 and we're going to rename it to enemy status effect container. It's going to be 047 and then it'll be 391.7 and 87.3. We're going to add in a horizontal layout group that we're going to uncheck width on and put upper center as the alignment with a 10 unit spacing. So now the enemy has so back in the enemy prefab, we're going to drag in the enemy status effect container into its container spot and its inspector. And we are missing something. We actually need a enemy status prefab as well. So actually, let's just copy it. So we're going to highlight it, hit Control D. We're going to now rename it as enemy status. F2, remember, is quick rename. And we're going to change the width and height here from 100 to 32 by 32. It's a little bit smaller. It's going to fit basically right in the area between the name and the health bar. We're going to click on the effects manager. We need to attach just the enemy prefab. The container will exist when an enemy is created. We'll have that attached. We don't have to worry about doing that right now. Okay, so now we have enemy statuses showing. So if you drag an enemy status in as a test into the container, it shows up right there. Right, there's a little hover thing that we got to fix. It actually sits in a new spot, so let's do that. Status effects info panel will actually sit at, it'll be a top left anchor, and it'll be an 83.6 and 172.8 with a 200 width and 100 height. We'll make sure that we get the pivot correct. So hold shift, left click. There we go. Now I type 83.6 again. There we go. It's off to the side. Perfect. In the info panel, we have the title. The title needs to be adjusted a little bit. It needs to be a 3.3 up top and 11.6 right and a bottom of 53. And now that'll show status, no problem. The text, we're gonna set top to 50. So, and then the info text, we're gonna set the top to 50 instead of 54, just for a little bit more room. And it should be good. Basically how it's going to work when we have this in is you'll be able to do damage to a unit that will give them some kind of ability effect. You'll be able to hover that effect and it'll explain what effect that is. Now that that works, we can delete the enemy. We can first hit apply on the prefab to make sure that everything is saved. Delete the enemy status object. And then we will apply the enemy UI. Right click, create empty, or create up here, create empty. Rename the game object to Trinket Manager. We're going to reset the transform to 000. Bring the Trinket Manager up into the managers section. And we're going to make a script for it in the manager section of scripts. Right click, create C# script, Trinket Manager. Hit enter to open it. We're going to get rid of start and update. We're going to make this an instance so that you can reference it really easily. So public static Trinket Manager instance. We're going to add a public game object Trinket prefab, because we have to make a Trinket prefab. Then we have a public transform Trinket container, where it's going to drop in when we get one. We're going to have a public list of trinket types. It's going to be all start combat trinkets. And we're going to do an equals new list trinket types. We're going to add a little comment here. This is all trinkets that do something at the start of combat. So anytime a new trinket gets added that does something in the start, we add it to this list. And then we need a public list of trinket types again. Another trinket type list called all current trinkets. equals a new list. So now we need all trinkets. This is all trinkets you own. Now we need a reference of a data reference, right? So now we need a public dictionary of trinket types to trinket data, the scriptable object. Call it Trinket Dictionary, DICT, equals a new dictionary and have it pre-filled. Perfect. We also now need a public trinket data called pants down. And that's the one trinket that we currently have. So this is going to be where you list all scriptable objects of trinkets right there. Okay. So in order to remember what we actually have, you hit F12 on trinket types. You see that we only have one trinket here right now called pants down. So we're going to be able to call this in the Trinket Manager, and the Trinket Manager will respond back to us with whatever data we've attached to it. So now we're going to do awake. We're going to do private void awake. We'll write our instance information now. So if instance is not equal to null, which we've done this multiple times before now in this project, instance is not equal to this. Destroy this.gameObject, return. Otherwise, instance equals this. We're going to set up one more thing on here. We're going to do a thing called set up Trinket Dictionary. Okay, which we don't have a method for yet, but we're going to make that right now. So you're going to hover over it, hit Control period, hit Enter. And you just got to get rid of using system. And then for some reason I get pop-ups. I'm in Visual Studio 2019 and it for some reason throws pop-ups at me and I don't understand. So inside Setup Trinket Dictionary, first thing we're going to do is do a all current trinkets dot clear. We don't want the trinkets to have any data before this. So then we're going to do Trinket Dictionary dot add trinket types dot whatever your trinket is that you need to add, so pants down, and whatever the value is. So now you're attaching the trinket type to the scriptable object, right? We can make this more clear too. Hit Control and R two times. Control R, Control R. It asks you to rename it. So you do. Let's put SO at the end for scriptable object. You hit Enter. It's now changed up here as well. Now we know that it's a reference. It now connects these two. Now we need a way to grab this trinket, right? So public trinket data, where it's going to return trinket data, and it's going to be called get trinket from type, calling in trinket types T. It's going to return Trinket Dictionary at spot T. And we don't need to do it, we don't need to make sure that it exists, because if we don't have a trinket type, we don't have this. Although we can add something like, we can do something like if Trinket Dictionary dot contains key, and we put a not contains key, put an exclamation mark ahead of it, not contains key, T, we do a debug.log error string.format, and we do 0 inside brackets, inside curly brackets, is not a valid entry in the Trinket Dictionary. And we add a comma, and we do t.toString. We need to fill out what this 0 is. And then we put a little semicolon at the end. We're good to go there. Oh, looks like we need another parenthesis. And then we say return. Return. Let's return here trinket types, or let's just return null. Right? That way it doesn't, we don't have to worry about it. It's good to go. So this now does what's called a sanity check. It says, hey, is there a trinket of this type? Is there a data trinket of this type? If there's not a data trinket, then put this entry, put this into the console, and then return nothing. Otherwise, return the correct thing. Now we need to do a public void add trinket. We're going to pass in some trinket types called trinket. We're going to do an if not all trinkets, all current trinkets dot contains. So if it does not contain trinket, then we will do a game object G equals instantiate trinket prefab into trinket container. Similar to how the effects work. G.getComponent trinket dot trinket data, and I realize now we actually don't have trinkets created in this game yet, so we can do that. We can do get trinket from type and pass in trinket. Then we do current trinkets, all current trinkets dot add trinket. So now we need to actually go in and make the Trinket script and prefab. Let's go ahead and do that. All right, so in the game UI, we're going to make a new empty called a Trinket container. It's going to be a bottom left align. So hold shift, click bottom left. And we're going to do 64 width, 64 height. It's going to be a top left align, so hold shift, click top left, and we're going to put it at 0, -161 is going to be 1920, and 100. So now we see it's going to be right there. For some reason our UI is off. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It really depends on what game you had open last. So just in order to find out if that's not on or off, you click layers, turn the little I button on for UI. You can also even lock layers so that you can't touch them. Trinket container will have a horizontal layout group, and that will have a 10 padding on the left side. Also put a 12.5 spacing. It will be a middle left alignment, and we'll turn off width for the force expand. Now we need to make the trinket. So it's in here, create empty. We're going to call this trinket. We're going to make it a 64 by 64. See how it's setting up in the right spot right here? We're going to add in a image. It's a 2D image. It's fine leaving it where it is, because we're going to be changing the values anyway. And we're going to add in a new script that we're going to make in the main hub of scripts. Create new script and call it Trinket. And we're going to open it up. Reload all. Delete, start, and update. Trinket uses Unity Engine UI. It requires a public Trinket data for Trinket data. It also requires stuff that gets filled in from the Trinket data. So public string Trinket name, public sprite, Trinket sprite. We'll add in a multi-line above this variable, public string Trinket description. Actually, I prefer a text area instead. So we'll do the text area, and we'll do parentheses 510. That's the minimum width, or the minimum lines length of the text area, and the max lines. So you can see 5 lines with it being blank, and you can have it stretch to 10 lines. We also need a public text object called title text, and another public text object called description text, DESC text. This is actually pretty simple because it's just a display. This is just a displaying script. It doesn't actually do any functionality. So we do start. So private void start. And we're going to call load trinket info from data. We're going to hit control period and place in control period, then enter to place in this. And we're just going to fill in everything. So now trinket name equals trinket data dot name. Trinket sprite is trinket data.sprite. Trinket description is trinket data.description. Then we do a get component image dot sprite is trinket sprite. We do title text dot text equals trinket name dot toUpper. So keep it all capital letters. And description text dot text equals trinket description. In the very beginning here, so we're going to do if not trinket data. That's the same thing as saying if trinket data equals null. This is a shorthand way of doing it, where you just put a exclamation mark there, and it says, hey, there's nothing in the trinket data value spot. We're just going to type return. That way nothing gets passed. It will break all of the connections here. Now that we have the Trinket script created, we can drop it onto the Trinket object we created. So put it right here. Boop. While we're up here, we're going to put the Trinket Manager script on here as well. We'll fill that out in a little bit. Let's take this trinket and drop it into the prefabs. That way we have a new prefab for the trinket, and we can now add some more info in the trinket. We're going to right click on trinket and do add new UI panel. The panel will sit center. So hold shift click center. And it's going to be 98 and -91. It will be 267 by 114. So it'll be a data information box. We're going to make this black instead of white, and so its opacity is perfect. We're going to add in two text objects, so UI text. We're going to call this title. We're going to hit Control D to duplicate it and call this one description, DESC. Title will be, you're going to hold Shift and Alt together, Shift and Alt, and click the bottom right one which has arrows going all different directions. And and then what that does is the left, top, right, and bottom create padding. So it's going to be 8.7, 6.8, right will be 11.6, bottom will be 58.5. So now we have a specific spot in this box based on these padding values that the text can sit inside. We're going to change this to trinket in capital letters. It's nice and easy to figure out what it is. And we're going to make it a 10:40 best fit. We're going to change the text to a bright yellow. There we go, trinket. That way it'll say the name of the trinket. The text, the description text, for now we're going to just have it say you take 50% more damage. And we're going to do the same thing here. Hold Shift and Alt, make it the entire size of the object, and 8.7, so same padding. 55.75, so now it's underneath the trinket. Right's 11.6, bottom is 6.7. So now it's just a little bit of padding underneath, and it's just that area there. And this is going to be white text. And we're going to make sure we do 10:40 best fit as well. There we go. Trinket, you take 50% more damage. We're going to hit apply on the trinket to make sure that it takes the panel into it, and then we can delete it off the system here. We can now go back into our script, back into the Trinket Manager, and now we have that reference now. It's not broken anymore. We now also need to do a public bool called has trinket. Trinket types T. This returns all current trinkets that contains T. This will return true or false on this. So now actually I don't even need to do this anymore. I can now change this to has trinket. And I just make this a not has trinket. So I want to know, does this trinket exist yet? If it doesn't exist yet, then we're going to do that, right? Then we need a couple more things. So we need to create the activation of the trinket, and that'll be a switch case where you figure out what happens when the trinket gets activated, and it'll call when it needs to be called. And then we will also set up the starting combat trinkets, which pants down is a starting combat trinket. As we know, just to reiterate, it is the adds 1 turn of vulnerable at the beginning of the fight. So the first turn you do does more damage to the enemy. So we're going to do a public void activate trinket. And we're going to call trinket types T. And we're going to make this really simple, right? We're going to do a switch, tab, T, enter, enter. Get rid of default, get rid of count, get rid of none. Add all trinkets here that you add to the game. And this is, so we have a case here called pants down. So if pants down gets called, we're going to do a combat manager dot instance current enemy dot add effect, and it's going to ask us for a status effect. It's going to be vulnerable, and how long is it going to be? 1 turn. Right? That's how pants down works. Right? If it's draw 1 extra card at the start of each turn, you would do instead of this add effect, it would just be card manager dot instance dot draw card, and that would probably be it. We would just draw another card, right? We would have another card in your hand, stuff like that. So we now need one more part of this Trinket Manager, which is a public enumerator, which is a mix of the coroutine. It's going to be called check for start combat trinkets. Obviously, we would have to make one for check for end combat trinkets, check for mid combat trinkets, right? Every time we do a trinket, we're going to make sure every time we have a different phase of the game, we need to make sure that we have it check its trinkets that we have available. So if we don't have any end game trinkets, for instance, like you gain 25% more gold from big enemies or something like that. If we don't have any of those trinkets, like in the game, they're not even created, they can be obtained, they couldn't even be obtained, then we don't need a script for it because it's not something that exists. So this is like you need this case by case, right? So inside this coroutine, we do yield return new wait for seconds, and we're going to wait a half second. And we'll do a for loop, for tab over from I, do start combat trinkets dot count. We're going to do an if has trinket start combat trinkets I. So does it have that one of those trinkets? Then we will activate that trinket. Activate trinket start combat trinket I. And we'll just call a yield return null. And this is so this runs in the background and doesn't make anything laggy. Runs on its own thread. That's the entire Trinket script. It's very, very simple. It does what it needs to do. You can't remove trinkets. I don't know if you noticed that, but you're able to add trinkets. You're not able to remove trinkets. There's 0 references here, so we need to add trinkets, and we also need to check for start combat trinkets. Now we need to go to the combat manager, so control comma to open up the quick find combat manager, enter. Inside start, we're going to add 2 new things here. We're going to do a Trinkets Manager dot instance add trinket, and it's going to be trinket types dot pants down. Right? So because we need a spot right now for the trinket to actually exist, right? At the end of the game, at the end of a match, you could effectively have a chance for a trinket to appear. And if you click that trinket to appear, it now gets added in. So you could effectively call add trinket wherever you want, as long as you add in a valid trinket you have that you don't have. We can then do start coroutine, and do Trinkets Manager .instance .check for start combat trinkets. So now it'll do that. So now that we have the Trinket Manager set up and it's linked back into the Combat Manager, let's go back to Unity. We're going to click on the Trinket Manager. We have some stuff to fill in. We have a Trinket prefab that we need, which is right here. We have a Trinket container, which is right here inside the game UI. Start combat trinkets. We don't have any in here yet. We're going to add in one, because in here you'll put in all start combat trinkets, because it doesn't matter if we have them attached to you or not. It's going to check through all current trinkets to see if you have one called Pants Down. And now it's asking for the scriptable object for Pants Down. So that is in your trinkets, Trinket Pants Down. Let's make sure that that is set up correctly. Yep, vulnerable of 1. That's perfect. So we're going to actually create a way for this to be simplified. So what we're going to do here is we are going to, before we call this switch, we're going to ask for a trinket data, and we're going to say t data equals get trinket from type t. So now we have that data information, right? Then inside here with Pants Down, instead of typing vulnerable, so we're going to do a for loop, for tab before the switch. The switch will be inside the for loop. So we're going to tab over once, and we're going to do t data dot all trinket effects dot length. And we're going to go ahead and bring all of this into the for loop. And instead of status effects vulnerable, we're going to type in t data dot all trinket effects at space I. So it's whatever, because you can have multiple effects on one trinket. Dot effect and t data all trinket effects I instead of 1 dot amount. Okay, so basically what this is now saying is every trinket in their scriptable object data has multiple, you can have multiple effects. You can make it 6, right? And inside you can also make this be frail for 3 turns, right? And you can just keep making more and more. And what this is saying here is however complicated this trinket is, it's going to run a for loop through all of the effects that we create, or all of the different things that this trinket does. And it's going to check based on what's going on here. So add effect, right? You could even say if I is greater than 2, so now we know it's the third one, right? 0, 1, 2 would be, right? So this would actually be, I guess, the fourth. This would be the fourth one now instead. So what happens on the first 3 or the first 5? So you can actually be very, very specific now on how this works. So we're going to bring this back, trinket effects back to 1. It's just going to be a vulnerable one. So now let's go back into Trinket Manager and make sure everything is set up. It is. We're going to hit play, and I think how it should work is it should add a trinket here and then set the enemy to vulnerable and draw cards. Well, it set the sprite correctly, but it did not fill the information in because we probably did not set that. Yeah, we actually have some things that have not been assigned. It says we have a couple things that have not been assigned here, right? So we have the trinket needs stuff assigned, and the enemy status container needs to be assigned in Combat Manager. Enemy needs a status effect container. We also need to set it to the. We also need to set it into the effects manager as well. So inside the enemy, inside start, before we collect the info from the data, we need to do effects manager dot instance dot enemy status container equals enemy status effects container. We just need to set that up. It takes a second for it to do it, and we're good to go before it can apply anything. Then we need to go into the trinket prefab and drag one in. Make sure you put it in a UI spot. You can't just drop it anywhere. It needs to go in the trinket containers so we can see it. We forgot to attach in these two text objects. So we're going to open the panel up. We're going to put title inside title text, description inside description text. Make sure we have Trinket highlighted, hit apply, delete it. This should now work. There we go. He's now vulnerable. Takes 50% more damage. The little heart. Maximize it. Right? So a little heart here for 1 turn. And he has pants down, and we start combat with vulnerable. So we're going to start adding hovers next video. And we'll be able to get you'll be able to just hover over things to be able to tell you what things do. Right? To be able to tell you what this does, be able to tell you what that does. This one's a little off positioned, so let's fix that. So it's open enemy right here. And we'll drag enemy status into the enemy status effect container. We'll see why we're so wildly off on everything. So the text information we have should be at 2.5 for X. It should be at negative 10.5, so now it's right next to it. It should be at 32.7 for width and 30 for height, which is perfect. It needs to also be 2 to 20 and not 2 to 40 for best fit. We're going to apply on the enemy stat. So then we're also going to go in the enemy status effects panel, which is this info panel. It's going to be a 172.8, so it's a little bit lower. 200 by 100, perfect. So that's the stuff there. We're going to apply on enemy status to save that information. Delete out of it. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to test it. We're going to see if vulnerable shows up and pants down cooperates. So we're going to hit play now. And it does, right? So let's hit this little thing right here. The little context menu and hit maximize. We're going to see that pants down is here. We're going to create a hover to hover over it. And we have vulnerable for 1. We can hover over that to see it as well. So as we inflict damage, we'll do 50% more damage. And see how vulnerable it shows up right here in the text. This is great. Everything is working as planned. So the next video, we will create the hovering system. We'll also be removing effects on a turn ticker. So every time turns go down by 1, when it goes to 0, it gets removed from the container. So thank you guys so much for watching the video. Much appreciated. I hope this is helping a lot. I'm having a blast making this. I'm happy I'm able to start making them again. I'm feeling a lot better. I think we probably have 3 or 4 more tutorials, I'd say, total. Just adding in different enemies. When you kill the enemy, you can put a new card in your deck and have a new battle start. Stuff like that. Put another trinket in so you can get a trinket as well. Until next time, guys, I love you. Thank you so much for watching. If you really liked the video, make sure you hit the like button, hit the subscribe button down below. And until next time, have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. See ya.